5/17. You are at a special common council of the City of Wausau, December 26, 2024, City Hall. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, call the roll, please.
There are 9 voting members.
9 voting members, and we do require a minimum of 8 to continue to proceed in this tonight. Proclamations, there is one proclamation which was read Sunday night at the Jingle Bells Ball, and that is in the packet for official filing with the clerk. Up next is pre-registered citizens for matters appearing on the agenda. And just a reminder that this is primarily for preserving these funds. The specific items will be potentially detailed, but we'll certainly entertain your thoughts on it. First up is Ron Alexander.
Good evening. My name is Ron Alexander. I live at 15420 Brandenburg Avenue in Merrill in the Village of Maine. I oppose the proposal to give $400,000 for homeless services to the Wausau Police Department. Their approach for services for those unhoused follows the guidelines of Robert Marbot, homeless consultant, who spoke in Wausau earlier this year. And these guidelines are not consistent with the state guidelines for best practices, which were spelled out by Mike Basford, the director of the Wisconsin Interagency on Homelessness, who spoke in Wausau on November 1st to kick off the Homeless Awareness Month. His message was to follow the federal Housing First guidelines, which include not to criminalize folks for being unhoused. These guidelines are not being followed in Wausau, but are supported by a growing number of local advocates and community members. I believe a better option for the $400,000 would be to allocate it to the recently formed City and County Joint Task Force on Homelessness. Membership includes representatives from the City Council, the County Board, along with government and community agency stakeholders in services for the homeless, including the Wausau Chief of Police. Their charge is to seek varied points of view, approaches, and evidence to produce a recommendation for a comprehensive plan to address homelessness in our area. They should have an opportunity to address how the $400,000 should be allocated. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Nancy Stenzel.
Thank you. Nancy Stenzel, 223-281 Azalea, Wausau. After learning that the Wausau Police Department is requesting this $400,000 in ARPA money that is earmarked for the homeless population, a group of us local citizens questioned the lack of transparency in this recent decision-making. Why has this not been shared? And the approval of ARPA funds must be made before the end of this year. And knowing this, however, there's no specific plan that's been laid out by the Wausau Police Department for how the funding would be used. And while the community resource specialist employed by the Wausau Police Department, even though she's employed by them, wouldn't this task be better served if it was processed through our county social services? Shouldn't there be certain expectations since the former day shelter was closed due to lack of funding and staffing? Even if the funding were to be used to support programs including day and night shelters, any kind of transportation assistance, and other resources that are aimed at reducing the homeless population in Wausau, Shouldn't there be a specific plan in place prior to handing over $400,000? This is giving a lot of control to the police department over what seems like something that belongs in a social services arena. Citizens are asking for clarity. We're asking for a specific plan of action prior to handing over such a large sum of money. Why are we not given more reasoning behind the decision? Concerns arise about the decision-making process, about it being open and accessible. This is a large sum of money, and being open and honest with the citizens would go a long way in fostering support and trustworthiness. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, first item here is the suspension of the rules under 6B, filing or 12A, referral of resolutions. So this will require a 2/3 vote. And the reason for this is did not come directly from a committee.
You may vote. Motion passes 9-0.
All right, first item up is 23-1109AE. It's a motion, or it's a resolution from council to authorize to execute an interagency agreement with the Wausau Police Department in the amount not to exceed $400,000 to purchase services and incur expenses for day shelter, night shelter, transportation, case management, and other programs or services for people experiencing homelessness, and a related budget modification for American Rescue Plan Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund funded projects. And that is pending. I have a motion from Watson, second by Henke. And if I could just set this up, because I can answer a couple of things that came up here. I mean, I would call this an effort by staff to adapt and improvise here to try to preserve some of these funds that are, as we heard, the dedication of which expires at the end of this month. And I would take you back just real briefly to our original council goal-setting session that we had, a retreat to set priorities and goals, and addressing the homeless and the unhoused issue was a priority. We had, out of that came a committee of the whole on July 15th, which I watched this afternoon. It was 2 hours and 38 minutes, I believe. A lot of ideas came out of that, from emergency shelter, day shelter, transitional, seemed to be the consensus. Transitional is something we need to work on. They talked about whether we purchase a building, have existing building, tiny homes, and really it came down to what is the role of the city in this space. And out of that came the County City Task Force, which recently met, I believe, for the first time in November. We expect that to end up sometime in February with some potential guidance, some potential commitments from the county, but we don't yet have that finished product to act on. So when we found out, and funding was also part of that committee of the whole, and we talked about ARPA being one of the only tools we have to make that happen, and that's what largely funded our 365 shelters. December 16th was when we officially got notice from Catholic Charities that they would be unable to operate after December 31st for various reasons. So we were caught in a lurch. What I thought we could do is redeploy that $32,000. It was for 4 months, January through April. So I reached out to a few staff members, the chief included, some alders, our finance director. How could we redeploy that $32,000? From there, the discussion was, well, what did we start out with Catholic Charities? If you remember, it went to Open Door, had some missteps there, it went to Catholic Charities, and ultimately we did not spend approximately $400,000. So that number is an approximation. So I'm prepared to direct staff to act on what we've already discussed as our role, and is to help support this. We don't have precise down to the penny plans at this point, but the chief will hopefully be able to answer some of those questions that were brought up, as well as our finance director. So I think this is an effort to preserve our options, because once that ARPA money goes away, we could be caught here in May and not know what we're going to do. If we come out of the task force with a plan and we can't fund it, that's a problem. So at this point, I'm going to take the questions. First up is Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your comments on this, Mayor, because you're spot on with this. We all have been working to prioritize as a council what we want to work on in our current 2-year term. And in that retreat, the homelessness did rise to the top as one of the things that we want to try to make an impact on during this term. And we were looking for ways that we can do that without either doing one of two things financially, either draining the city's reserve and contingency funds or using tax levy dollars. There was a resistance to that by most of us if there was another way. ARPA funding is the way. And, we've been talking in our finance committee for just under a year now that we need to have these funds encumbered by 12/31, lest we may lose those. And the last thing we want to do is send funding back to Washington that we can use to solve big problems here. This resolution, I think, is a good one because it does require that they would still use the procurement policy. The approval of any of those programs that would be entered into or considered would have to clear the Finance Committee and this council. We would still have control of those funds, but we would be able to then at least afford ourselves some flexibility in the year 2025. So if the task force does make a recommendation for programming that we wish to partner with other agencies on and fund, or if we need those funds to secure either continued day services or night sheltering services during the season that Catholic Charities normally takes the warm season off, we need to give ourselves that ability. And I think this does that for us. Like it gets us, if we need to find a way to fill that shelter gap between May and November, this is one way that we would have some funds at the ready. And I think that, in the resolution, they've given us a menu of things from case management to sheltering, to day services that we can pick from. They can work toward any or all those things. They may not achieve them all. They most likely won't. It's not enough money to achieve them all. But I think that this is a step in the right direction. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this maybe the proper point to have the chief? He wrote the resolution and we worked on that interagency agreement. So maybe he can fill us in and answer some of the questions we already have. Chief.
Sure. I just want to clear up any misconceptions. Like, this is not money going to the police department to be spent on police duties. My concern has always been what happens. There's two main issues for me. One, what day center services do we want? And there's $32,000 that wasn't spent that we anticipated spending January through April. And then a much larger concern for me is what happens when on May 1st, Catholic Charities closes the doors to their shelter and doesn't reopen them until October. We have spoken in meetings with Catholic Charities and asked them, what happens if the city is not funding or there is not a funding source for 365 night shelter? They were unequivocal and said, we will close. Those services won't be available. So I anticipate, whether it's popular or not, the consequences from not having 365 shelter outweigh the desire to not have that be city funded. So when the conversation recently came up with Catholic Charities not renewing their contract for day shelter services, and my question in our group roundtable conversation was, well, what happens in May when we don't have shelter services at all? What options exist for the city to be able to fund that? Because at that point, I would anticipate there would be a desire on the part of this community and all of your constituents that we should be doing something to provide shelter. And this opportunity, maybe none of this money gets spent on the unhoused population. It doesn't force the money to be spent. It gives you the option that if we do an RFP to look at what should day shelter services look like, or we put together an RFP and put groups together to determine what do we want shelter services to look like in this community, and we present that and there's a cost associated with it, This gives you options. It gives you the option of using ARPA dollars to be able to fund that for years 25 and 26. Or the only other alternative option, as I understand it, is to use reserve funds or levy dollars to be able to fund that. And I'm really afraid of what this community would look like if we have zero shelter services for 6 months out of the year. I think that would be a decision that we would come to regret. So the purpose of these dollars is just to protect them and protect the council's ability to allocate those dollars in years 25 and 26. And if for some reason it's not possible to allocate those dollars for the reasons listed in this resolution, the council still has the ability to use all of the other pre-approved, allocated, I'm struggling with what it's called, that, yeah, you know, whether it's trucks or infrastructure projects that were approved. We have more projects than there are ARPA dollars available, but it allows this council some time to take a breath and say, what do we want this to look like? And let's get some groups together and let's put proposals together and see what this community can come up with. And then you have the ability to determine how you want to fund that. The decision tonight is just to keep this fundable if you choose to, and I really hope that you do that.
Did you want to add something? And just to be clear, we wouldn't be giving back 400,000. We had contingencies for that, but it didn't include the unhoused. So we're adding that to our contingency. Alder Tierney.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a telephone conversation with both the mayor and Chief Burns today to express some of my concerns. One of my concerns was I felt like we were giving a $400,000 blank check to the police department and saying, spend it as you want on the homeless, which I have deep concerns about. I have deep concerns because there is not a concrete plan here. There is not even a hint of a concrete plan because it can be spent on 365 housing, transportation. There's a list of things that it could be spent on, but nothing concrete. I want to find an answer to the homeless problem too, but I also want a concrete plan to do that. And one of the things that I struggled with is when they talked about day services. I remember earlier this year when talking about day services, they were not used much at all when we were getting counts from Catholic Charities. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that the average daily census and who was utilizing the day shelter did not meet our expectations for the funding we were providing.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was less than 5 as an average. I mean, it was single digits. And so I can understand the night services, but day services, I can't see spending a lot on funding if it's not going to be utilized. So that's how I feel about day services. I can't see spending a lot of money if it's not going to be used. I definitely would want quarterly updates because if we are going to give $400,000 for homelessness, I don't want to be sitting here a year from now in this very same situation, struggling with what we're going to do with this population, because that has been a struggle. There's been talks with the county, but everybody's kind of pushing fingers at each other. The county is saying that we don't have to do this. There's nothing that says we have to do this. And the city is saying, hey, you should be helping us. This just isn't a city of Wausau problem. So as far as, I would want to see what the county is bringing to the board too, if anything. But my biggest concern is accountability for that money and seeing results. And putting an RFP out there scares me because I can't think that there's going to be a lot of people jumping up and down saying we'll do 360 home care or 360 shelter care for the homeless. So those are my concerns.
Well, just a couple of things to address. I think you bring up some valid points, but I would say that we have learned a lot since we started funding with ARPA dollars to some partners in homelessness. And some of the things that we've learned that has come up in these meetings is creating measurables in a contract and an agreement with them, creating expectations that have to be met that the funding is contingent upon. And so I would agree with you that I don't have a plan. I mean, to be honest with you, there's no other chief of police that's going to say, put $400,000 in our department. Be honest with you guys, you could take a Sharpie and line out this resolution and pick any other city department, because all it is a placeholder. But the concrete plan that you would have the ability to evaluate and members of our community would have the ability to give public comment on comes after we develop what our expectations are, which you can all be involved in the RFP process. And then you get the ability to evaluate with us those individuals that either do or we recognize there's a lack of organizations that have an interest in providing those services, and look at what is their plan for how to do that meets our expectations and actually moves the needle with our unhoused population. And I don't think $400,000 does that in this community. The list that you see in that resolution, there's no way to address all of those things for that much money. But I also think you as a council have the ability, if you choose to be creative in encouraging other municipalities or the county to financially participate. It's no different than the grant dollars. Most grants that the police department would apply for have a matching component to it. So yes, these dollars are available for this project, but in order for these dollars to become available, it requires match from other organizations or community members or the police department as a whole. And I think there's some creativity that can come out of that task force, and there's creativity that can come out of this council in encouraging other government entities to financially contribute to these solutions as well.
And just one more thing, when we were having our conversation, I had asked about additional staff being hired to implement and come up with this plan, implement it, and so on and so forth. And you told me there would absolutely not be additional staff
I
hired for the
swear
police
to
department.
you, Alder Tierney, that I have no interest in hiring additional staff to work out of the police department with these dollars.
Okay, because it seems like we do this when we get ARPA funds, and that's great. And then all of a sudden, we have these extra people on the tax levy because the ARPA funds are now gone. The employee stays, and that produces more, I guess, more burden to the taxpayer and the levy. So I just wanted to put that out there that you had promised me.
And I just wanted to promise in front of YouTube and everyone else that that's not, I have no intention of doing that.
And we have staff here, Randy's here from Economic Development with experience in writing RFPs, so we will use every staff member available to help do this, and we won't be hiring.
So additionally, I think that one thing that got brought up today that I will commit to is having, as we put these RFPs together, to partner with both the organizations that are working in that area, to include individuals experiencing homelessness, to talk to them about what should that look like, to be able to make sure when we put an RFP out, it's trying to check every single box that exists. And I'll be honest with you, like, that wasn't done the first go around in expending dollars. And then what we came up with as a result was frustrated staff, frustrated community members, and frustrated alderpersons when they're not seeing the results of the return on the investment that they're making with those ARPA dollars. So I think there's things we can do to try and mitigate that, and that would be the goal here.
Up next, Alder Gisselman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was a part of that call for that earlier committee of the whole earlier this year, and I think a lot of good ideas came from that. But here we sit at the last minute, the last day, almost the last day of the year, trying to work out some kind of a plan with regard to homelessness in our community. And there were a lot of good ideas, and now we sit trying to figure out what we are to do if action would have began then to really seriously think about what the city of Wausau's direction and policy with regard to homelessness in this community. We may not, I think we would be a little further ahead than at the last minute trying to figure out what's best for the homeless in our community. With that being said, is there somebody from, with regard to the, I have a question with regard to that third amendment with the Catholic Charities. It seems like that was approved in city council in November. It would seem like there was a good path. Was there some reason why Catholic Charities sort of at the last minute decided not to provide services?
Sure. So, do you want me to answer that?
Go ahead.
Mr. Gisselman, so from Catholic Charities, the city council funded the day shelter through April 2025 for the first 4 months of 2025. That's what they knew they had funding for. Internally, they had staff leave, and they ended up with only one staff member left for day shelter services. In order to continue to provide day shelter, they needed to hire staff, and they found it impossible to hire staff with only a 4-month window of guaranteeing employment. And so that being half, and the other half being a desire on their end to really focus on night shelter services, but they didn't think they could appropriately staff day shelter because of not having a firm financial pathway forward to be able to hire staff. That's the explanation they gave us.
Well, and I would add to that is we did have a contract with them through the end of this year, and we were all aware
Right.
of that. Yeah, we probably should have looked ahead. When we offered them that extra 4 months, they didn't sign the contract, and they didn't notify us until the 16th. So we did not have a contingency. You can put that on the mayor, you can put that on council, you put that on whoever you might. So here we are trying to recover from failure to plan. We did come out with the task force, which we had hoped, it's another slow process, but it is moving, and here we are trying to salvage some of that.
And I just have
Point's well
questions
taken.
with regard to the general, the case management, all of the positions that were itemized, but I have the agreement that we're passing tonight says that this with regard to the interagency agreement, this interagency agreement authorizes the Wausau Police Department to execute service contracts and issue purchase orders to further the goal of serving the unhoused population and reducing the number of unhoused in Wausau. And this, and the Wausau Police Department agrees to remit invoices for payment. With those kinds of wording, I wonder what oversight members of standing committees of the city council with regard to oversight and exactly what the police department is doing. It's part of the agreement that we're passing tonight. I just need an understanding of that.
And I want all the oversight.
Well, my question is, who is going to be providing that oversight? Is it public health and safety? Fine, members of the city council. That's really not part of what we're talking about tonight, because that's not written in any agreement that I'm seeing.
I would think it would be appropriate on a monthly basis to report to public health and safety the progress on RFPs and what intention ideas that money could be utilized for, but also report to finance. It's a lot of money, and they're responsible for the dollars. I mean, all I can tell you is I want you to have the ability to spend dollars, and this is the only pathway forward. But with that being said, I would have no interest whatsoever in spending any of that money without a majority vote of this council moving forward. So
But the wording of that agreement says something else.
No, I completely understand, which is why I'm here talking to you about that. That just happens to be the vehicle that I think exists in a way to protect your ability to spend those dollars on those things at this point. Because there's not a contract in place with a third party or a 501c3. So a interagency agreement for those dollars to be held for those reasons.
But the 400,000 could have been given over to community development for their could not have been for their
Sure.
governance of the plan.
Yeah, I think it could have been given over to probably any city department.
Sure, and we did war game where the best to go with it. In order for it to go to CDA, would require a board meeting. This seemed to be the most expeditious way to do it. And it sounds like you were trying to put some sort of, maybe an amendment that would help us, guide us to have some periodic looks on it. I mean, we could do that if it doesn't upset the contract. All right,
Well, I'll
think about it.
come back to that. Thank you.
Alder Killian.
Put my name back in again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to mention that I am extremely disappointed in the way this meeting was handled. I understand we have dates and deadlines, but this was thrown on the city calendar the day before Christmas Eve. Some alders were not even aware of the meeting until they read an email on Monday morning, and the public would likely not have been aware of the meeting had the media not written about it. So I just wanted to say that I understand that we had some dates from Catholic Charities that were delayed, but I still think this could probably have been handled a little bit more expeditiously. My first feeling was to vote against this proposal for reasons that Alder Gisselman mentioned and for reasons that Alder Tierney mentioned, because there was no plan. But I, too, had conversations with the mayor today, and I had a very lengthy conversation with Chief Barnes. And what I would like to do this evening is provide a synopsis of my conversation with Chief Barnes so that residents understand why I may support this, but I haven't decided yet until we've heard some more feedback. The chief indicated to me that the sole purpose of requesting the entire $400,000 rather than just the 32, which he thought was going to be the initial proposal, was to preserve the ARPA funds for the city to use for the homeless, since the funds had to be allocated prior to the end of the year. I discussed many issues with Chief Barnes, including assisting the homeless in getting badger care and the need for wet shelters. He and I obviously have some differing opinions about several issues regarding the unhoused population. I, however, am thinking about supporting this proposal, but would be less likely to support this proposal if it is not written into the resolution that when funding efforts to use this money are being discussed in the future, there are public participation processes, including those who are unhoused, if they wish to participate. I discussed this with the chief, and he indicated that he is not opposed to that. I did also ask the chief what he felt was a reasonable timeline for the RFP for the day shelter. He indicated he would require assistance from a team of city staff to draft the appropriate RFP, and felt the RFP could be drafted and sent out with responses back sometime in March. So, Mr. Chair, I'm asking you what the process would be to add language to the resolution, including the public participation information. Would that take a formal amendment? Because I cannot support this proposal without that kind of verbiage in the resolution.
So it sounds like you're looking to place an amendment.
I am.
Would you care to articulate it a little more, one more time for the clerk?
Okay. I've been thinking about this at great length.
Okay.
And I'd like to add one more line to the resolution above the word approved and have it say this: be it further resolved that prior to agreement for services, a public participation process will occur for which efforts will be specifically made to invite meaningful engagement from those actually experiencing homeless and dealing with homelessness, should the homeless choose to participate.
Okay. Do you have a copy for the clerk?
Okay, I have
So if you could press your amendment button.
I got it. Don't worry
You've
about
got
the
it? Okay.
amendment button. I'm just gonna.
Okay, and then we would need a second, and we have a second from, or do we not?
I'll second that.
We have a second from Alder Rasmussen.
Is it possible to get the order of speaking after the amendment?
I'll write it down.
You know, because we're only speaking on the amendment, and I'd like to speak on the actual resolution.
State your question again.
Could you just like make a mental note of the order of who's ready to speak on the amendment when we come back after we vote on the amendment?
Sure.
Thanks.
My mental notes and the clerk's penmanship will get there.
Just, yeah. And probably spelled correctly.
If they choose. Okay. Can you put it up on the board? Oh, there it is.
There.
Okay, the amendment. Can you read that? It's not showing up completely. So we have a motion and a second to amend. I lost it. You want to reread that?
All right, so I have the amendment to, and it's on the bottom there, to add above the word approved, be it further resolved that prior to agreement for services, a public participation process will occur for which efforts will be specifically made to invite meaningful engagement for those actually experiencing homelessness, should they choose to participate.
Okay, with a motion and a second, Alder Watson, are you on this one?
Yeah, I was wondering if it could, like, the amendment could include, like, what committee this would report to, sort of along the lines of what Alder Gilsman was talking about before. Like, could it be added in here, like, because we could hold these public listening or public information sessions at, like, PHNS or finance when they correspond with it.
They're federal dollars, so whatever the federal guidelines say about public comment and communication, I believe those guidelines should be followed. So do they report to a committee, or do we actually have, before the chief says, I want to spend this money on a day shelter, or I want to spend it on busing, or I want to spend it on whatever, it feels as though there should be open public comments allowed, public participation.
I think there's two different types of participation that I'm envisioning for this process. One would be, excuse me, the ability to provide public comment in the course of a public health and safety meeting or a finance meeting where this is being discussed. But in establishing what the RFP would look like and what we would want that proposal to include the participation, if they choose to participate, of those experiencing homelessness, I suspect that they would be more comfortable meeting with a group, not in a formal setting of of a council meeting, but to sit down and post meetings and invite people to a more informal sit-down to talk about their experiences and their opinions on what that would look like. So probably both of those things. I don't think either of them are probably addressed in ARPA guidelines for what that looks like, but my intention would be both to other community partner organizations and to those individuals experiencing homelessness to invite them to a more informal setting. I think we'd probably get more accomplished in that environment than having people come up and give public comment about their own
I
experiences.
think that's a valid
Listening,
point.
listening session perhaps at a library. I don't know if we need to, go ahead.
As far as the amendment, could you also put in there something about not just the homeless, but those who are involved in caring for the homeless? So it's not just the homeless people, but it is those who have been involved with taking care of the homeless, so that we get feedback that's well-rounded.
Is that an amendment to the amendment?
Well, that would be an amendment to the amendment. I think we have that implied in the main contract and resolution, that the staff working with these various agencies, we're just including, we'll call them listening sessions for the more specific, for the unhoused. I'm open to some suggestions, but Cody?
Mine on. Would you want to, without objection, make a change to the amendment you're offering, and then we could get approval
Maybe
by the
say
second?
made to invite meaningful engagement from those actually experiencing homelessness and participating in the care of the homeless. I mean, if I had a problem and somebody came to me and said, I want to help you solve your problem, first of all, they would have to talk to me about what my problem is. And second of all, if I had a caretaker that had been taking care of me, I would want that person to be involved. So, I mean,
Sure.
when you come to our Public Health and Safety Committee, that's great, but they haven't been involved in the care of the homeless, and they don't understand what's involved. So I think having that aspect and saying that they will be involved is an important issue.
Okay, and I think as we're trying to work through this on the fly, I think it's appropriate then, you added the line, and those participating in the care, and you were the original motion, and we had a second. Would you be okay with that pen and ink change? Okay. All right. Further comment on the amendment? Mr. Gisselman?
Yes, thank you. I think at times, I think it would be good for the city council to hear from the homeless. I think we welcome them even at public comment. I think that as we work with the homeless situation in the city, I think let's hear what they have to say. With regard to Alder Watson's point, with regard to the other, I think that may stand alone as a separate amendment once we get past this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Lukens, on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am definitely in support of hearing from people that are unhoused. I guess my thought too is maybe, well, first of all, that, there is also a variety, people unhoused for a variety of reasons. And so I guess the only thing that I'm thinking of is some people may be willing to come forth and talk about it, and that would be wonderful. And the same for their caretakers. But again, I guess I'm just thinking that there is a wide variety. So I guess how that will be gone about, I don't have any idea. I'm guessing maybe some, that are agencies that are working with them would be, reached out to. I don't know. That's what I'm guessing. So I guess I'm just wondering, this is kind of vague, but I guess I'd maybe trust that will be worked out. But the other thing is, at Public Health and Safety, or I would think public health and safety would be, I'd like to see it as one of the committees because Ms. Rieger, or I don't have her new married name, so I'm sorry, but she does give regular reports, and there are people that she's working with that do attend and, speak to this at times. So I guess I just want to include that so that people know that that is reported on regularly, every meeting, and then occasionally there is someone that either is or has been unhoused that she is working with. So just want to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Rasmussen.
Thank you. The Public Health and Safety Committee is actually engaged in this activity already. The Finance Committee a couple months ago requested that Public Health and Safety work with staff to come up with a plan and measurement metrics addressing the day center. That's how we ended up starting the process of articulating a contract for what the deliverables should be. We certainly in that committee would be willing to consider the logistics of both the public input and either new programs or continued programs that they wish to fund with these funds. And ultimately, on the money side, the buck does stop with finance, so we would expect that any recommendation we make would go there as well, and then come to the full council, so that all of us have input into how those dollars get spent and what programs we decide to enter into. So I think that this amendment gets us where we're trying to go, and I think if we preserve those funds and give ourselves that ability, as the chief said, I think as we move into 2025, we'll be able to come up with a conduit by which we can get some programming together and really articulate those deliverables as well.
Thank you. Alder Lukens. Okay, go ahead. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I did have a couple of other questions, but just so that I'm sure about the order of this. So we would vote on the motion to amend,
Correct. And then we'll come back to the main
and then
motion.
we'll come back to the original motion. So I think that's what my questions were on the original motion. Okay, so then I'll just,
You'll get another crack at it.
okay, thank
All right.
you. Thank you.
You're first in the hopper coming back. Okay, seeing nothing further, this is on the amendment. Does anyone need it re-spoken? It's up there. All right, seeing no. You may begin voting.
You may vote. Motion passes 9-0.
Okay, back to the main motion. And let's see if we have the order saved. I think it was Lukens. Alder Lukens is up.
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Mayor. So a few questions. There were some public comments that I guess I would like to, some ideas from public comments that I guess I would like to ask for clarification on. So one, asked about the $400,000 to be allocated to the City and County Joint Task Force on homelessness. Is that, so I've heard Chief Barnes say departments, that this money could be allocated to any department. So I guess I'm just asking, in order to address that.
Yeah, that task force has no budget, and I don't believe that task force is an entity that has any authority to spend money or receive money on behalf of the county or the city or the jointness of it. So I can understand where being on that task force, as well as Alder Killian and Alder McElhaney, to be able to say, what are the issues? Here's the issues we learned about them. Let's spend money. Here's the money we have to spend. Would probably be more fun to be on a task force if we had that, but I don't think that's even a possibility, a legal possibility
Thank
at
you.
this time.
That's what I wondered, if a task force, if it needed to be a department. So thank you for that. Also, another was, would it be better processed through social services? And, again, that would, my guess is, well, I'm just going to ask that. would it be better processed through social services? I'm curious what, like your, or someone's,
So I think there's a cart and horse thing here, because that is a conversation that's come up in the task force. And I would say this, I don't know what the recommendations are going to be. I have often said that I run a police department, not a social services agency. We, by default, became the city organization that was trying to dual purpose. So I don't know that social services believes that this is their role. But what this resolution is asking you to do tonight is not determine where these dollars belong or who should be in control of them. It is simply asking this council to authorize the preservation of these dollars so that at some point in time in the future, if you want to allocate them in any of those lanes, you still have the power to do that.
Yeah, good. Well put to Gary's point. Go, yes.
Thank
Follow
you.
on? Go ahead.
So I appreciate that. I guess I just wanted to address a few of those. And from having served in the past on the Finance Committee, I know the importance of, having those ARPA funds, the deadlines, being able to reserve those funds to be able to spend. So what I have heard tonight is that this is, it's the attempt is to try to reserve those funds so that we can in fact spend them, and that before those funds would be spent, they would come back before a committee, at least one committee, maybe two, Public Safety and Finance, and then the council, so that they would not be spent just by the Wausau PD, correct?
Correct.
And the RFP process, so before, if there's a proposal, in order for it to be approved, it would go back through the committees so that then the money could be spent. But my last question is, would, and this is only for clarification, would every RFP need to go through the Finance Committee before being issued, or only like after a proposal has been submitted to you? Thank you.
I mean,
We're going to have to, go ahead.
Mary Ann can
Well,
answer it. or
I
can.
just, one of the reasons ARPA is saying an interagency agreement exists is because we're obligating the funds and we're giving authority to someone else to spend those funds. And that's why they're considering this an obligated fund. So if you put too many strings on it, I'm not sure, again, it all is going to depend on who is reviewing these documents. Our auditors are responsible for auditing our compliance with the federal regulations. I don't know if they would have, if we put too many stipulations on additional reviews, if they will have a problem with that. Having a public hearing didn't sound like a stipulation, but bringing everything back to committee for approval prior to the actual spend probably is too much of control, I guess, over that future spending.
It would be overkill.
Well, I think they'll just say, well, you never really obligated the funds because you made them too contingent on too many future approvals, and so that obligation didn't exist. Now, again, because it's so late in the hour, it's hard to vet all of these things properly. Last week I did reach out, or on Monday, reach out to the auditors. They were on vacation on Monday, so I wasn't able to actually share the agreement with them. But I know there is something that says, like in the federal government gave like a little template, and it said if it's too contingent on specific things, then it doesn't meet the requirements of an interagency agreement for obligation.
And it's just the normal course, though, that a proposal, when it's time to spend it, that would go through the committees, correct?
Well, I mean, we have a procurement policy that the police department is still, we comply with. And so I think it's $25,000 or more. We get an RFP process, and there's oversight of that process. And I just know that I would feel more comfortable as a department head reporting on the process of the RFP process, the content of the proposals that we receive through public health and safety. So I think the question was, on the proposals, we're pretty transparent in the Public Health and Safety Committee about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then before we spend those dollars, my experience has been like it comes to the Finance Committee and they're aware that we're spending those dollars, but you might be looking at me like I'm telling a not accurate statement.
Well, it all depends on the procurement policy in what type of agreement. So if you're signing a one-year agreement, it's budgeted for, let's say when Eric hires engineer. If it's in the budget and it's a one-year agreement, it doesn't have to come before council for approval because it's been budgeted for to do this engineering service. He doesn't get council approval. It's a one-year agreement. If it's, a 3-year agreement or more than a 3-year agreement, then we need council approval. So it depends on the circumstances and how it applies in the all intergovernmental agreements today on the procurement policy require council approval. So it really depends on the agreement itself. And there's certainly, typically, there's nothing wrong with bringing an agreement to council. Again, I think if we maybe decide that, but it doesn't say it in the resolution, that's fine. I'm just concerned that if the agreement gets too specific and ties the police department's hands too much, that then they're going to say the funds have not actually been obligated. That's my only concern. But if you say, if you have in here that they will conduct a public hearing or obtain, feedback from council and, as Terry Killian said, I didn't have a problem with that. I just got a little concerned when Carol was talking about all of these approvals that we're specific approvals that we're gonna have. And again, I could be completely wrong about this. I would have to show it to the auditors, see what they say, see if they are gonna opine that this does meet the interagency agreement.
And just to be clear, I was not advocating that every RFP come through all the committees. I was just asking, because to me that seems overkill because it has to be, if it has to be approved, if the spend has to be approved, then it would be overkill anyway. Does that make sense? But anyway, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alder Watson.
Oh,
You're on.
Yeah, I'm on. I just have a few questions, I guess. So the 400,000, so it was only 32,000. So where did the 400, that was going to be ARPA funds we were going to lose at the end of the year? Or they're in reserves or?
Right, so when we sat down, so I've been talking to the departments about the funds available for homeless the entire year. And when we sat down this summer to talk about it, we had predicted how much was still going to be available. And we knew there was going to be a significant amount of money. Then there was, as I think is, public information, concern about, as has been said here tonight too, the amount of participation, Catholic Charities' ability to do the work. And so, through staffing meetings, it was determined that we were going to give them this $32,000. We also talked about doing an RFP, but the RFP was never completed. And so we were going to try to get an agreement with Catholic Charities for the $32,000, do an RFP for other services. That RFP never occurred. So when we were looking to transfer the $32,000, Matt called me on Friday or Monday, I don't know when it was, and was like, okay, we're gonna work on this. And he asked the specific question, how much is available? So we have bills from Catholic Charity through the month of September. So October, November, December is when that contract will expire. We haven't received their invoices for those months yet, but if we look at that September bill and we, then do an estimate, we'll have about 400,000. But people didn't want to give that to Catholic Charities. So we were only talking about the 32,000 for Catholic Charities, and we were going to recover or use the rest of the money through those motor pool allocations. Obviously, when Matt was working with me on this, he feels strongly that there's need for homeless services, as he introduced the subject earlier tonight and said, well, what will we do if we only apply 32,000? I said the rest of it will go to motor pool as Finance and Council authorized. But if we know we're going to need money for homelessness, here is an opportunity to allocate that now. Otherwise, as Matt said earlier tonight, you'll either have to find resources outside of the city's coffers, or you'll have to do a transfer from reserve to fund those services if they're deemed necessary and there's no other resource.
So then,
So he advocated for doing the 400,000. This is in conjunction with the mayor on Friday. And is today Monday? I don't know, the holiday has me so
Thursday.
goofed up, I'm sorry. And so, yeah, because you were gone on Monday, so we did this on Friday. Yes, you were off on Monday.
so
Yeah.
quick question about the stuff we approved for the ARPA funds to go to the motor pool. What are the ripples that those are not going to be used then for motor pool?
Well, and that's what we said, we'll be funding them out of motor pool then. And, so we had to have a contingency of what we were going to do for these circumstances. We talked about circumstances where a contract, all the funds don't get spent. We talked about vacant positions that we can't fill that result in leftover money. We have 1 in police, 3 in fire. Those were all examples of how ARPA dollars that we've set aside could not get spent. And then we would have to return them to the feds. But we said, okay, we're going to also allocate that we can use it to fund these vehicle purchases, because several of those vehicle purchases, we're not going to actually take possession of the trucks until 2026, because they take that long to produce. So we said, okay, that gives us a little flexibility. And it was really just a way to make sure that we could spend all of our ARPA dollars.
So then the stuff we approved before, we're taking that money and applying to this instead, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then is there going to be any ripples in the
Well,
motor pool?
there will be,
Because-
yes. We'll
okay.
have to find alternate funding solutions for the motor pool money. Exactly,
Okay.
yes,
But that'll be a year and a half problem?
correct.
Down the road.
I mean, it's a problem today.
Okay,
So, and we went through that during the budget process with the finance committee, that we aren't generating enough money to fund all of our motor pool. And yet we're limited by levy limit. We talked about doing a transfer from the general fund if there were profits at the end of 2024 as a way to help bolster the motor pool.
okay. So that clears it up a touch. I was like, how did 32 become 400? That sounds, I wish I could do that magic in my budget. But I get it. So, and then, Chief, you mentioned if there was an RFP, there will be, right?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to wrap onto a word you said, but, so it'll go probably to finance, but you might report, but we don't want to put any extra stuff in it because we don't want it to be too clamp down on you. But you'll anticipate coming to public health and safety with it.
Yes.
Okay. And you're going to work with Randy to do an RFP or?
He's going to be the coach.
Okay. Because I saw something
He doesn't know
about,
that yet, maybe, but he was volunteered.
is that the proper city officials and now therefore be resolved probably? That's the?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. So we don't want to put that committee thing in there because it might be too many
Well, and like I said,
requirements.
I could be wrong about that, but we don't have a lot of resources available right now to answer that question. And I'll try to call up that email that I sent to Matt and the mayor and Ann regarding this little template that the feds produced. I'll see if I can find it.
Okay. And then I just had a question too in this, the last be it further resolved. It said something like authorizes appropriate state officials to enter into agreements for services on behalf of the city, including but not limited to the interagency agreement. But they'll all be for unhoused. It'll all be.
Yes, so if you look, what I tried to do in the menu of things there, and both with the Joint Task Force on Homelessness as well as the United Way's Housing Task Force, really they've highlighted several things that are really the priorities. One is shelters, day shelter, night shelter, transitional housing, case management, transportation, which covers a swath of issues affecting the unhoused population. So I put them as the general areas that the dollars will be spent in one or all or some of those, so that it still leaves some flexibility, like what is the number one priority at this time that meets everybody's needs to be able to put a proposal forward.
And then I know, Mary Ann, you mentioned something about the procurement policy. With the procurement policy, it sounds like if it's already in the budget, you wouldn't come to council, but all of these expenses would be outside of the budget. So maybe they would, like for procurement policy.
Well, so you're creating the budget as part of this resolution. Basically, you're reallocating the budget. And we talked about this with Ann Jacobson, because when we initially created the ARPA budget under Catholic Charities, the budget resolution said it was for homelessness, day, night services for Catholic Charities. So we felt like that was too specific, and we needed to actually include that we were reallocating those funds to this interagency agreement. So there is a whereas that, yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the record here, we're out of order. Are on the speakers. It's going to be Larson, Martins, Rasmussen, Killian, Gisselman, Tierney is what we had written down prior to the amendment. So
You can take me out of the queue, Mayor. I don't need to
Okay.
speak anymore. Thank you.
Alder Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a lot of good things said here tonight. It's kind of like it's a last-ditch effort here to save $400,000 before the deadline is to get it back to the feds. But my question is, for Mary Ann, is, we've all talked about, I've heard the word preserve these dollars and allocate these dollars, and we're kind of in a sense allocating them, but we're not allocating them, or we're preserving them. And so my question, and I heard you talk about, it loses me, but are we within the federal guidelines of what we're doing here?
My understanding is yes. This agreement and this resolution would meet the requirements of the federal government as far as obligating the funds at December 31st, 2024. And I did talk to our auditors about, well, what would it look like and how will we juggle the funding of motor pool and not funding, let's say, another project. And so the plan basically is that before the end of the year, we would look. So if we use this example of these positions, by October or November, we will know whether we had vacancies. So we should be able to predict what that savings is in that budget. And we would then basically redistribute it out of that account to motor pool, because the vehicle came in during 2025. If 2025 is the year that we experience the vacancy, we would look then, reallocate the funds to this other purchase.
I guess-
And that is
I'm sorry, go ahead.
the auditor's understanding of what is acceptable.
That's the word I was looking for, auditors. But I mean, it seems to me like you're hiding money in the motor pool that's supposed to be used for homeless, and it just seems, I certainly don't want to return $400,000 to the government, and I certainly don't want to write the police department a $400,000 blank check. But this whole thing seems to be a mess, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Martins.
Okay, thank you. I think I got a few things to say about this, but first I'm gonna talk about the allocations and the preserving the funds, because I think this is where we're kind of getting hung up on right at this moment. In the Finance Committee, one of the things we've been talking about in the last 2, maybe 3 months is over encumbering our ARPA funding in order to utilize every last dollar that has been allocated to us. Because we know that there's going to be projects and programs that either will not be completed by the end of 2026, or they just aren't, or they're going to come under budget, and we're going to have extra funds left over. But our pinch point is that money has to be allocated, encumbered by the end of this year, by December 31st. So what we started doing in finance is looking at methods in which we can over encumber, add more allocations to our remaining ARPA dollars that would have some amount of flexibility in them in order to use that money after the allocation deadline, but before the spend down requirement, which is the end of 2026. So one of the items that was brought forth was to use motor pool as a vessel for this. So one of the hardships of motor pool is that it does need work. It does need extra funding to meet its demands, meet its needs, but we can use what the Finance Committee had determined is that we can allocate a significant portion of remaining ARPA funds, over encumbered ARPA funds, to the motor pool in order to spend that money down. The money is going to come from is going to go into the motor pool regardless if we use ARPA dollars or if we use the general fund or whatnot, because there's the needs of the motor pool is to purchase replacement vehicles and et cetera. But if we use ARPA funding in order to some of those over encumbered ARPA dollars that we have left over and move it into motor pool, that takes some of the pressure off of the motor pool. So this is sort of where this kind of it sounds like it's kind of we're shifting things back and forth, a shell game kind of thing, but it's really no more than we're overspending our ARPA dollars by using a funding source, the motor pool, that can be funded with general fund or with ARPA funds. But now coming to this point with the $400,000 that we want to use for the homelessness, this is another instance where we are over encumbering our pool of ARPA funding. And the whole deal is that it's use it or lose it. So the money that gets spent first out of our ARPA funds, out of our allocation, regardless of how it has been encumbered. So preserving the funds is important. We don't want to leave anything on the table. It's very unfortunate that the day services are being eliminated from Catholic Charities. So I understand the prescience of this ask in order to, reprogram this money, reallocate it for some other purpose within serving the needs of the homeless. I'm not super excited of using, parking it, into the police department's purview, but, I totally understand we need it, it needs to go someplace. And that's probably the most reasonable place to put it in that time is of the essence. So I do get that. I think we can make this allocation. It's still within the spirit of what the committee has chosen to do with its original ARPA, with its original ARPA funding approvals, when, in providing day and night services to funding for the Catholic Charities. So I think, this ask and this approval, of these $400,000 is within that, the spirit of what we've gone through with our ARPA ranking process over the last 3 years. So I'm okay with that. I know, we probably haven't, as a body, probably haven't had the best track record when it comes to meeting the needs of the homeless, working with the, to find solutions. I know that we're not going to end homelessness. I know that's way too big of an ask for us to tackle, but I know that, it's one of those one step at a time kind of things. So I think making this allocation, approving this resolution tonight is an important first step in order to first preserve our funds so that we can come up with a workable plan to spend our remaining ARPA dollars. And then two is to maybe take what we've learned in the last couple of years and to put them forth into a better solution for meeting those needs for the homeless. So I'm gonna support this this resolution as it stands.
Thank you. Preserve and provide contingency. I think I heard you say there. Terry Killian.
I really appreciated Alder Martin's acknowledging the fact that we haven't been terrific in satisfying the needs of the homeless, because in essence we haven't. And I don't think it's because we don't care. I think it's a problem that has kind of overwhelmed everybody. One of my concerns with this proposal, and I did discuss it with Chief Barnes today, and I think I mentioned it to the mayor when I spoke to him, was if we allocate $400,000 to the police department, and they say they're going to look at housing and case management and transportation and all of the items that were listed, is that going to, because I'm on the homeless task force and so is Chief Barnes, I wanted to hear his opinion as to whether or not that was going to diminish the motivation of the county to assist the city with the homelessness problem. They're going to say, oh, they've got $400,000, now let them take care of it. I would like you to hear what Chief Barnes thinks about that, because I have heard the administrator at the county say we're not mandated to do this and we're not mandated to do that. And Becky McElhaney picked up and she said, well, the city hasn't been mandated to do these things either, but we saw a need for social services, so we hired Tracy Rieger, and she is under the supervision of the police department. So we did that, not being mandated to do it. And I really was concerned that this $400,000 to the police department might demotivate the county helping us.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly you could have a county board member that might look at it and say, $400,000. And that's a big number. I'm not trying to be dismissive of that. But $400,000 does not move the needle far enough in the direction where we're going to look at it and be like, wow, look at the progress. So for context, if you take what this council has approved and paid for day center services and night shelter to get 365 shelter, it's about $200,000 a year is my rough estimate, 210. So $400,000 really is enough money to maintain what we've had as the status quo. I think there is the opportunity for this council to lead through some tough decisions and some expectations that both our representation on the task force as well as my own is to acknowledge that this is going to take more than the city of Wausau. I think there's an understanding of that, but I would revert back to the ability to, similar to grant funds that the federal government puts forth for whatever, with matching funds and expectations that in order for these funds to be utilized, it requires partnership. And I think we're just at a point where when we look at the communities that I think that are doing it right, it's because there's financial partnership with everyone. And if there's been a time since I've been involved in the homelessness issues that I think is ripe for building that financial partnership, I would say it's right now. But I would also tell you in all honesty that in my conversation with Alder Killian, I said I wish I had a magic 8-ball and could tell you exactly what the future looked like, but I don't. And so other than we get the ability to use the influence that we have to try and push that partnership. And again, this is as far along in that process as we've ever been with our partnering government entities.
Thank you.
Alder Gisselman.
Thank you. So what is the plan? I mean, so how do we go about, after today into January, how do we go about planning the city in cooperation with the police department with regard to planning and efforts to deal in sympathy with the homeless situation? Is it going to be pretty much just running out of the police department? Is it going to be involving public health and safety, a little bit of finance? So what's the first step that we take? Because now that we have the money, okay, we have to have a plan, I would think, sort of an effort in some capacity to progress. What is that plan? That it may involve the mayor's office, I'm sure. But I think that as we go forth, $400,000 is a lot of money. And I get a sense tonight that we really don't know which of these efforts is going to be. I mean, how do we, for instance, start to develop day service? You know, do we approach open door? How do we start to approach serving the homeless population? Is that just in the police department?
Well, I don't
or
think.
how do you envision that?
Sure, I don't think that rests just in the police department, because I don't think you're going to get as robust an outcome if we just look internally at the police department. So, I mean, we talked about the amendment that includes involving community partner organizations as well as unhoused individuals. And to be honest with you, anybody that's a concerned citizen of Wausau that might have a great idea. But when I look at the rest of the city staff, which is who the mayor gets to tell what to do, and then we do those things, I would expect that we'd have a group of 3 to 5 members of city staff that would sit down, run this process, which would begin in early January. If you ask me what the number one priority for me is at this point in time, as I look at that list, it's ensuring that we have 365 shelter year round. The second priority would be looking at day center operations. However, I leave open the possibility that we might have an RFP that includes both. Because that would be ideal, that at 8 o'clock in the morning, people don't have to leave and go somewhere else to receive day services, that someone could show up to a shelter and receive services and maybe not have to be in a lottery every night to see if they get a bed. So those would be the things we would work through. That's where my priorities list, when I look at that list, shelter is high on that list, especially that emergency shelter. So I would expect the mayor to assign staff to work with us on that, putting that RFP together and working through the criteria that have been established with us and reporting on a monthly basis to public health and safety on our progress. That's how it would start in my mind.
Because the question arose a little earlier with regard to exactly memorializing the oversight as part of the resolution. I guess that was sort of dismissed. But I still think that, I think there's a great sentiment in the city council that we really do want to know what is progressing. I think that, I agree that 400, I worry about the rolling stock issue. It sounds like that's going to come back on the tax rolls, and I have an issue with that. But that's not on the agenda for tonight. But I just feel a sense that the city council should know, as a larger issue with regard to how the city council moves forward with a plan and for a plan for dealing with the homelessness, because it's not just this $400,000 that deals with the homeless situation. It's more than that. It's an attitude of this community, and it's larger than $400,000. I wish there would be a mechanism for that, but hearing from our financial director that is maybe a little bit too much, we'll progress, but we'll see where this goes. Thank you.
Mayor, in the interest of time, I'd like to call the question.
We have a motion to call the question.
I'll second that.
From Martins. Second from Martins.
I don't think so, no.
And there's no debate on this.
All right. You may vote. Motion passes 7-2.
So having called the question, we are voting now on the main motion.
Point of order, I believe those in line have still the right to, I think our rules call for that, those people in line still have the privilege of speaking. Is that not correct?
That is not correct. You believe it is correct? Okay, stand by. We'll have to confer here for a second.
That's the thing, I don't think we have it in the rule.
I believe it's an argument.
It's in the rules. I do not believe it's in our rules, but let me, I'll check with Robert's rules here.
Because that's why the county specifically had to add it to their rule, because it's not addressed in Robert's rules. But I don't know what past practice is here, so.
Unless it's in council rules, Robert's rules seem to indicate that the debate is over, we vote on the main motion.
It's up to you.
Okay. How many do we have left there? Well, we voted to call the question, and we're going to have to take the vote.
You're good.
All right. We're voting on the main motion.
You may vote. Motion fails 7-2.
The motion failed. It required 8 votes to pass. It was 2/3 majority of the council. Up next, file number 23-1109AF. It's a council resolution approving and adopting the budget modification for skateboard park and pickleball courts. Have a motion from Rasmussen, second from Henke.
You may vote. Motion passes 9-0.
Up next, public comments and suggestions. Open, the floor is open. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion from Larson, second from Lukens. Voice vote, we'll take a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? See you later.